Hi, Jill.
Hi, Quentin. How are you this morning?
I'm good, good. What about you?
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here today. Um, so today, welcome everyone to the one. I see we have a couple of live followers, and for all the people who will follow us and watch this video on Facebook later on YouTube, welcome to this second edition of En Camino. Encourage podcast, or if you want to go like an interview, where we're organizing to speak about well-being and self-improvement. Today, we are really glad and really honored to have Jill with us. Jill Ouellette, how do you pronounce? Is it
Ouellette.
French or Ouellette?
Oh, but it is. It's French Canadian, so you could say Ouellette if you want.
Ouellette, okay. To have Jill Ouellette with us. We know each other thanks to our certification school that we've done in the past year, and I was really we met quickly a few times during our working sessions online, and I think we had a good connection from the beginning, and we wanted to continue to just see each other and speak as we both are passionate about education and learning and all of that. So thank you, Jill, for being with us. You've been recently certified in corporate social responsibility. You've been teaching fashion merchandising program for over 20 years after working in the industry for a short period of time. Recently, you've decided to become certified as a life coach. And if I'm not wrong, it's about to be like in a couple of months. I think you told me you were gonna be done.
July.
July. You have been coached yourself in your life, so you have like both understanding of both sides, which is I think a great point as a life coach to be able to understand what it is to work with a life coach. And the reason why I really wanted to invite you today was that you have that understanding of the academic world, the education world, with all the strength it can have, but also the challenges that sometimes students and staff can go through. And being a life coach, I think it gives you skills to maybe approach the profession in a different way. So when you spoke about the program that you designed in your institution, I was really curious about it, and so I was looking forward to have you speak about it. So maybe you can just start by speak. Maybe what's that program about, Jill?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Quentin. I'm thrilled to be here. Always happy to talk with you and work with you. I agree. I think our connection was immediate simply because we are passionate about teaching and we're passionate about our students. And I think that's really incredibly important. So really, one of the reasons I came up with this, as I mentioned, right, I had some life coaching of my own, had gone through a variety of a couple of years ago, I'd gone through some loss and some major life transition and got the help I needed. And I was lucky to be able to mitigate that and work through that. And I was really lucky to be able to do that. But the more I dug into life coaching as being life coached, as well as the topic of life coaching, I found, wow, why can't I take this a step further? So not only had I gone through a life transition, I also observed over 20 years in the classroom, my students going through market changes. So I thought that this was really a great time to make that connection. So as the deeper I got into life coaching, the more I realized I have really been life coaching students for the last 20 years on my own anyway, right? So why not formalize it a little bit, get some credentialing, and be able to bring this into the classroom, maybe be able to use it outside of the classroom. There's many, many applications. So that's really what got me started into this. Was reaching deep into life coaching and realizing that there was a connection between or a useful tool that I could use in my classroom. So.
Thank you, Jill. So the question I want to ask you, how would you define the difference between being a teacher, an educator, and being a life coach? You say that you've been life coaching for years, but can you explain to maybe the people who are following you following us. How could you describe the difference, if there is any?
Sure. There actually is a difference. And that's an excellent question. And I think what's really important now, we kind of throw around the term of life coaching really all the time, right? What does that mean? Well, as you know, I'm not certified as or study, my area of study is not social work or a psychiatrist or sociologist or right, those kinds of things. But I am being certified as a life coach. So what is the difference? The idea is that I don't counsel students. The idea is that life coaching really is driven by that client. So what does that mean? It means that I am able to stand by that client, cheerlead for them, empower them to be able to find meet their own goals, whatever direction they take, whatever those goals might be. They're not mine. It's a no judgment zone. And I am able to be a sounding board, a springboard for that client. So like a coach an athletic coach, for example, would take the skills and abilities of that person and elevate those. I really kind of do the same thing. So we are trained, as you know, Quentin, to ask questions, ask the right questions at the right time in order for that client to be able to really think about and dig deep inside themselves to maybe intuitively be able to come to some decisions, know that they have the power and the ability and the skills already inside them to be able to make decisions, to be able to not feel quite so overwhelmed, to be able to make progress toward goal setting, et cetera. So if I do find that, and we learned this, of course, in life coaching, that if there is an instance where the client's issues may be beyond our scope of expertise, that we are then able to recommend that they get help with a licensed counselor. And I think that's important for us to know as well, that there are limitations to life coaching. But sometimes life coaching is really all that someone might need. They may not always need a counselor. So that's really what the difference is.
Thank you. I'm maybe a bit of a dreamer, but when I think of education, of learning about university, the picture I have is a place where that happens. Where the learner is growing and finds what he needs. So, based on your experience, how do you explain the stress that sometimes is present in post secondary education? If it was about learning and growing, it shouldn't be too much about that tension and that stress that we face, and that you, if I'm not wrong, intend to help students for. So can you tell me a bit about that kind of like nonsense in a way?
Sure, absolutely right. Kind of who's sitting in our classroom is really the way I look at it, right? How has this, and in fact, over the last 20 years, as I mentioned before, there's such a marked change in our students. So kind of how have they changed, and what are they experiencing right now? Because we know if that student is not healthy, if that student is having problems outside the classroom, they're not going to be a successful student. And so I think what's really, really important for us to remember that today we have found there's actually a lot of data and information about students' education, the lifestyle of a young college student. So the information, the data is there. Thank goodness, right? We're starting to have dialogues about who is sitting in our classroom. And institutions historically have not been sensitive to teaching life skills. They haven't been sensitive to what that student is going through outside of the classroom. So today, of course, we're becoming much more sensitive. We're having dialogues. Institutions are creating programs for students to be able to help mitigate some of these issues. So what might these issues look like? In fact, I found a really excellent study by the NEA, the National Education Association, recently that talked about students entering into college are entering in already kind of burned out, right? They're entering in tired, right, already. So one of the issues is that we find them to be a little bit overwhelmed in a lot of ways, right? There's a lot of separation anxiety. There are issues having to do with finding themselves, right, as you know, at that 18, 19, 20, 21,
Yes.
when we are discovering relationships. We are trying to understand our own sexual identity, gender identity. We are now being pressured to produce really good grades in a competitive college environment, right? There are, and then we end up with college debt, right?
Yes, too.
Right? And
The
they're looking
money.
forward to a very uncertain future for the most part. We live in a culture where we expect young people at 17, 18, and 19 to major in something that they might think they have to do for the rest of their lives, right? So there is just really this undue and unprecedented amount of pressure on young people today. And it's difficult to be that age and really try to mitigate a lot of these waters. So that's really one of the major issues that we find is this is the kind of student that's sitting in our classroom. So as faculty, how can we then reach that student? How can we then nuance some of our pedagogy in the classroom in order to be able to be effective, have them learn, and then be able to give them the skills and the tools they need to be able to mitigate some of these issues having to do with such great overwhelm and burnout. So it's a very interesting place where we find educational institutions today, and how can they meet that student who has changed over the last decade or so. So it's the nuances are very difficult to manage, but the beautiful thing about it is institutions, as I mentioned, are really kind of coming to the forefront now. They are engaging students in different ways outside of the classroom. That's very good with regard to their mental health, their physical well-being. They offer meditation and yoga. They have excellent first-year experience opportunities. And a first-year experience, of course, for college institutions is really kind of orienting that young person into a college life. What might it mean to them, right? And then be able to carry that first-year experience learning into the rest of their 4 years. So they really keep track of the students' well-being throughout the whole 4 years that they are at the institution. These are relatively new programs that are taken to a whole higher level today. So I'm thrilled for that. A lot of monies now are given to various areas of the institution that might need additional counseling. There are actually universities that have an entire life coaching program, right? So we really are able to start funding these programs at a higher level, taking them much more seriously. Parents are expecting that when they send their college student away. So the importance of mental health and well-being in these young people has become so much more important. I think that we are starting to finally see some significant changes in college programming to be able to meet their needs. And I'm really excited for that. I mean, that's a real relief, but I think we still have a long way to go. We know that things like suicide has increased really from early teens all the way up. One thing that we find is that there's a lot of drug use. If they have things like anxiety, right, being able to mitigate that through addictive behavior, right? They just don't have the skills or the high level emotional intelligence to be able to know and understand that there are alternative ways and healthy ways of dealing with their anxiety, for example. So being able to have the institution, as I said, be able to give them the tools and the program that they need to be able to know that there are alternative ways of helping to self-soothe. There are alternative ways of really dealing with their anxiety and their overwhelm. And I think that's not just important, but it's critical for these institutions to take that place today.
Thank you, Jill. It's amazing. Like I love that. I think it's you just like see so clearly the situation. I know that in the audience we will have like a few teachers, we'll have a few maybe counselor. Or, I think most of, let's say like a fair part of the staff in education world is aware of that, and sometimes tries, and there is a progress, and yet I must admit that in some institutions, even if like there is a trend, it's still sometimes not totally there. So I wanted to ask you, like, when you set that design and created that program, how did it go? How was it perceived? Maybe you're in like an amazing institution, but just that question about was it welcome? How was it perceived?
Sure, that's a great question, because I had, of course, was going through the life coaching training, and I had mentioned it to the my colleague who is in charge of training our colleagues and continuous education for our colleagues.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, could you do some programming with Sure. So I did a couple of just some like little brown bag lunches, right? In terms of what life coaching was, who our students were, and how we could, potentially reach them a little bit better." And our academic dean sat in on one of those programs, and I was thrilled. She came to me afterwards and, said how much she appreciated what I had, the information that I had shared, what I was doing. So I thought, you know what, why not start up a new program or start up a course? Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating, Quentin, because I had announced in the fall that I was, to all my students, that in the spring, I was going to be offering a course on how to deal with anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, as you know, in life coaching, it's one-on-one. How could I, keep this small and a little bit more of an intimate environment with the student and be able to yet, reach at least a few people? It's experimental. I'll see what I can do. So I capped the class at 10. Mm-hmm. Well, my seniors, actually, the week that you can start signing up for classes, seniors can start signing up at midnight on Sunday. So I went in on Monday the next day. In my inbox was 16 emails that said, "Professor Ouellette, can you sign me into this class?"
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was closed already. And in fact, I had one student tell me, "Professor Ouellette, I was signing up for classes at 12:15 and it was closed." So that told me, right, there was a need. So I went to my academic dean. I said, "Look, this is what's going on." I ended up with 3 sections of a 1-hour course that was offered 1 hour a week. And I had anywhere from, I still needed to cap it. So the most students I had in one was about 15, 16 students, but 12 to 16 students for those 3 classes. So incredible amount of support. I had an amazing amount of support from the students in the classes before, during, and after. I was able to then kind of change up the, kind of nuance the classes as I felt was necessary as I went through that process. So,
yeah, because sorry, I'm cutting you off, but most of what maybe people understand of life coaching is like a one-to-one setting, correct? Yes. So how did you like find a way to adapt, that to a larger group?
Sure. That's a great question. And that's something I really needed to step back and think about. And luckily, my years of teaching and curriculum development really was really my go-to for this. So I thought, all right, what do I at least first need to establish? Well, I knew enough about students with anxiety and had studied this enough to know that they needed a safe environment. They needed, so I went in even on the very first day and talked about confidentiality. We talked about what we talk about in the classroom, stays in the classroom, talked about community, right? I know that they should not feel alone, because community for students with anxiety is not just important, but it's critical. When they're isolated, right? This is really when they have a lot of problems. And we learned that during COVID. So when we got in this community, in this classroom, it was important for me to create a community. And then, as with life coaching, it's self-driven. It's driven by that client. So I passed out a survey, and I said, "What are the 3 things you would like me to talk about? No. What do you want to be able to do? What tools do you feel you lack?" It's those kinds of questions. So I really surveyed the students. And so actually when I went in, which is, I'm always prepared for class, right? I know exactly what I'm going to be talking about, in the middle of the semester, et cetera, right? But this class, I really kind of had to just let that go. So it was really important for me to not construct this class in a way that would inhibit my students from learning. So I really allowed them to really take control as much as they possibly could. It's still a college classroom and I still need to kind of direct, but in terms of the content, it was really up to them. So when I gathered up all those surveys, then I started digging into areas that they really shared with me. I also provided a platform on our LMS system throughout campus, our learning management system, that allowed for them to have a say and have a place. So if they found they had a good author they wanted to share, books they wanted to share, a good app that they wanted to share, a great podcast they wanted to share, I was able to they were able to add to that. So they were able to share with one another. I also know that in the classroom, students do not like to be called on. They don't want to have group work, right? They are pressured to have an A. So it was difficult to kind of come up with some academic rigor. So I kind of set that aside, honestly, and it was one credit class. And I said, all right, I want you to show up every time, ready to go, and engage in the activities. But I said, other than that, please don't worry about your grade. You do that, everybody's going to get an A. Let's just know that right now. And I said that on the very first day. So I said, I eliminate as many of the pressures as I possibly could that they might find in the classroom. I didn't necessarily call on people. I wanted to make sure that they had tools available to them and that I supported them in those activities that I suggested in between each week that we met. So on our LMS system, I would offer articles, podcasts, websites, anything that would help support kind of our subject that we engaged in that week. I would also have journal prompts. And I thought students don't even buy textbooks, right? They're never going to go out and buy a journal. So I went out and bought journals. And in the very first day, right, I gave journals to everyone. And I also thought, all right, I need to make sure, because they have so many different students, all different types of kind of spectrums and issues and levels of anxiety. My hope or my goal in all of this is just to make sure that every one of those students can have at least one thing that they could use to be able to help themselves after they leave here. So we engage in a variety of things. So, and I told them, not everything is going to resonate with you. Maybe some of you are already engaging in some of these activities. Great. Or is there something maybe you can nuance to maybe improve? So is there something we can actually engage in to make it a habit now, a new ritual we had 14 weeks, which is great.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That is a luxury. So I was at least able to not only engage in activities and subjects that were really driven by them, we did it over a period of time. So one thing I found, and I think I find this too with a lot of with some life coaching clients that I've had already, they would like a quick fix. Students will tell me, just tell me what I need to know, Professor Ouellette, to take the exam, right? We want a quick fix and we only want to know what they want to know. So what they need to know, basically. So the idea is that I explain to them, this is going to take time. It takes discipline, right? You've got to be able to want to do it. As much as I want to take away as a professor, right, all of your anxiety, right? This is up to you. And so the idea, of course, is that I needed to give them tools to be able to have some control. So we journaled every day. We actually would start out the class every day with a meditation, just a quiet time.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Right? Just a quiet time. And I would maybe have a little journal. I might focus that meditation, or it may just have been free. But the idea is that we sat quietly, and getting used to that idea of sitting quietly and just being calm. We did breathing exercises as part of that meditation. And you could use those breathing exercises when you felt those anxious triggers coming on, right? So they might journal after that meditation. So these were tools that they could use really right away after they left class. Then we would talk about a variety of subjects. And this is really when it came from the life coaching. And so instead of feeling like I was talking to one individual person, I took a little bit of a broad approach and, would give them, obviously didn't have a textbook, right? So I would share with them information that I found, maybe notes that I had taken from other books, and we would talk about them. And so it was a variety of the life coaching training, but also my other studies that I had engaged in order to be able to really think about the specific group of college age students and what their needs might be. So then, of course, sometimes we would end up with a meditation. Other times we would not. And then at the end and at the halfway through the class at midterm, I surveyed them again. At the end of the class, I surveyed them again. And I said, look, what do you wish I would have talked about? What were the best tools? What were some of the best techniques that we engaged in the classroom that you think you have been able to use as a routine today? What changed in you? Did you meet some goals? And they knew that the items that they put in their journal would not be shared, right? So it was important throughout this entire time to create that sacred space. Yeah. Know that the time that they spent was really, really important to them. Know that they could put up some boundaries and be able to have the power to be able to control their environment a little bit in this self-improvement. And I found at the very end of class, the best things that they liked were the prompted journals. They said, oh, I can journal, but I don't know what to write about, right? So a little bit of direction was really all they needed. They felt the idea of being mindful. And I talked about mindfulness on a regular basis. So if we're mindful, we stop and we think. And we're so quick. Very often I find that students' anxieties, they're so automatic. It's just this automatic default. They don't know what else to think, right? So I have them stop and be mindful to really define what that is. How are they feeling? What are they feeling? Why are they feeling? And journal about things like that, right? So by the end of the semester, they at least had a little bit better handle on the tools that they could use to be able to mitigate this, but also recognize what was going on in their mind, being able to mitigate some of the issues or reactions and responses to really kind of their everyday, and found that approach actually worked pretty well. But I couldn't have done it without the students, right?
I love that you're in that dialogue, that you ask them on a regular basis, not just beginning and end, like to stay in that dialogue and that understanding of their need. And so the question I wanted to ask you, and maybe like it's a weird question, but you mentioned that it's not that easy to leave the space, and to be okay to how can I say that? To let the magic happen, in a way. So the question I had for you was like, what do you think in as teachers, as educators, where does that need to have everything planned? Where does it come from? Because it can be a blockage for what you're talking about. I could easily see myself at some point, okay, I have I don't know how long were the session, but let's say I have half an hour or an hour with students. I cannot leave them with nothing. So I'm going to control the situation. I'm going to control the space. So where does that need of control comes from? According to you?
Sure. And I think for me, right, I have students walk in, and you're right, we have a limited amount of time. We have, as experts in our area or industry, right, we have a lot to say. We want to engage our students as best we possibly can, right? But for this particular topic, I really had to take a step back, right? I had to just know that I had to let go of the control, because that's the last place these students wanted to enter into, right? Excuse me, it was a place that I would control. So knowing who that student is and what their issues and topics might be that really hold them back from learning as best they possibly can. Yes. That really was the driver for me to be able to know what role I played in that classroom at that time. Now, it isn't normally kind of necessarily the way I would treat all the rest of my other classes, right? But I knew that I needed a little bit softer touch. I knew that these students needed more help. It was brave for them to even sign up for the class in the first place, but it also was really the first step. And I told them, I said, being in this class and knowing that you have maybe have anxiety or recognize that you're uncomfortable or there's some things going on in your life that you're having a difficult time dealing with, is that's 85% of it, right? Just even being able to recognize that and being here. So I think It also helps to have anxiety myself, so I can be more empathetic.
Yes, c'est vrai.
Right.
Yeah.
I was anxious for this podcast to talk about anxiety, right? So I knew
Yeah.
that. And so I know that there are things that I can do to mitigate that, right? So I can come to whatever it is I'm doing with my best at any time. And so I think even just being able to help these students and cheer them on with regard to even being brave and being there in the first place, I think is really important. Some other kind of light touches that I knew I needed to have was that talking about things like failure and vulnerability, because that's so much, the fear is, you and I know, right, from life coaching, fear drives so many of their decision making or lack of decision making. But being able to talk about topics that I think needed some discernment. So if we are fearful about making a decision, is that fear valuable? Is there value in thinking about the fear, or is it then inhibiting us from making a decision? And that's really what we talked about. Vulnerability is that we can discern whether or not this vulnerability is good for us. And, is this students were hung up on failure? They're afraid to fail, so they don't try things. Well, is it really failure or is it a lesson? So it was very, very important for me to have a really kind of understanding, light, delicate touch on these topics. And I knew that I was afraid, right? That I might touch upon a topic that might really trigger something more in our students. But I also told them, and they knew where they could go for additional help. I was available to them 24 hours a day if I needed to. And I did end up meeting I think 4 students one-on-one throughout the semester, just because they needed that one-on-one. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but
it does. Thanks for sharing that, because it gives also your experience developing and experiencing that kind of relationship. In my school, we have mentoring program, so we have that small group setting and the teaching, not necessarily with the same kids, but I found it really interesting, and it's I think a plus in education to have different kind of relationship with the student, because a group of like 20 plus students, you cannot develop the same kind of relationship. It's almost impossible. But you can do different kind at different time of the day in school. So I think it's really inspiring. Thank you, Jill, for sharing all of that. I had another question. So we are kind of arriving at the end of the interview. You should come back.
I'd love to.
With more. So I know that in the the audience, we will have students and also maybe parents. Will watch this, and so, Jerry, your parent of like your kids are at university, and you feel they are sometime on another campus. And so my question to you was, what are maybe the 3 key things that a student can do to better, or at least take care of themselves? You mentioned a lot, so maybe it's just going to be what you spoke about, but
sure,
like, what would be the 3 things that the student can do, or the teenager can do, and maybe what also we can think about it together, what the parent can do to support the student who goes through that.
Sure, absolutely. And yes, this is a very difficult question, right? Because there are so many things you can do, but so to kind of narrow it down in 3 ways, I'll do my best. But the idea, of course, is that I think really number 1, students, young people need to know that they're not alone. And I think this is so important. It's one thing to really why I bought them the journals, and I tell them it's one thing to think it. It's something else to write it down. It's that cathartic exercise, right? Telling someone that they aren't feeling well, even if they don't know why. I don't want them to think that they can have to solve all of these problems on their own, right? It's very, very difficult right now to be a young person and a teenager and young adult, right? Don't feel alone. once they have found that community, right? Is it a community they can go to on a regular basis? Or there's so many sources and resources out there available to young people today for them to not feel alone. So being able to take that first, just that one first step to be able to tell someone else, right? Parents, I would suggest that they listen and listen without judgment, right? That's extremely important. Listen without judgment. And I know as a parent, right, the first thing I want to do is put a Band-Aid on it and make it all better, right? But these problems are much deeper than that very often. And these issues are much deeper. And I think it's very, very important that they find that safe and that space within their own home, within their parent. Maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's an uncle, maybe it's a grandparent, right? But finding that other adult who is that safe, non-judgmental space, I think that's not just important, it's critical. And then the parents can also act as a source of information, right? Have them be able to reach out. I think what's really unfortunate, we live in a society that really shames people with anxiety. And that's something else that we talked about. The student is not wrong. They're not wrong for feeling this way. And we're not going to avoid feeling these feelings. We're going to feel these feelings, but we're also going to attempt to understand them. And that's where really life coaching comes in. So maybe have the parent reach out to a good life coaching organization, talk to a teacher, right? Whatever it might be. But knowing your resources that you have available to you, I think are very, very important. Another piece of advice is that I would share is that it really does take work. This takes discipline, but it's not impossible. There are small, little edible steps that you can mitigate and use on a regular basis that will allow you to really become kind of free and liberate yourself of some of these feelings that you can then use as a springboard for the rest of your life. These are really excellent tools as you engage and develop and maturate and involve your emotional intelligence, and it will all, come together. Just give it some time and give it some practice. You'll start to see that things will start coming into place.
It makes me think of that, big book we have in the life coaching world, like Atomic Habits, about those small changes we slowly build one day that might look small, but at the end of the day, it's the 100%. And it's sometimes we have that, and I'm like that, like I want to have it done quickly, and I'm not satisfied enough with the small changes, and then it's not enough. But at the end, if we are consistent, it can be meaningful.
Yeah, and we talk in life coaching about peeling that onion, right? So as we pull away, right, these various layers. And I would say finally, one last piece is really think about being your best friend. And I know that sounds obvious. But
sorry, Jill, I'm just going to close the window because it's quite loud. Just a moment.
Sure, yep.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Sure. No worries. That's okay. So the idea, of course, is that we often find ourselves being our worst enemy when really we should be our best friend, and being objective about the voice that we have in our mind and the words that we tell ourselves, and really being kind and gentle on ourselves, and be objective in our kind of, every day and how we treat ourselves. That's extremely important. We often treat other people better and then we treat ourselves. And that can be really very, very difficult to work through. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Jill. Thanks so much for everything today. I'm so glad you accepted the invitation. So what's next for you in the coming months? What's your plan?
Sure. Well, I'm excited. I have committed myself to taking the leap, myself to changing careers. So I really hope to incorporate a combination of life coaching and corporate social responsibility into my next career. So I can't wait to see where it's going to take me over the next few months. And I'm really excited.
I'll be amazed to see how all of that unfolds. Like, you have so many skills, so many, so much knowledge. So I'm convinced it's gonna be just amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate the support. And best wishes to you. I'm excited for your podcast and all that you're doing with life coaching as well.
Thank you. I think we share that, that will to, just like continue learning, continue growing. And sometimes it takes, like, so new initiative, and it's just, I find like really nurturing. And so I'm just going to put here the little banner, my little thing, that with your email address, if anyone wants to contact you, I'm going to add the email address on the video on Facebook and Instagram as well. So hopefully people will use that. And yeah, I'm just going to finish the interview by thanking you again, Jill, for spending the time with us to share all of that. I'm gonna use that in my classroom, that's for sure, next year. And yeah, and for your energy, your smile, and everything. So thank you, Jill.
Terrific. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.
Maybe another time then.
Absolutely.
Bye bye, Jill.